17 of the best physicians threw up their hands in collective defeat and confessed, "We are powerless." The billionaire father was already resigning himself to his son's inevitable demise. And that was the precise moment a simple, poor cleaning woman noticed a single minuscule detail that every expert had missed. Within the hour, the child's eyes fluttered open. Deep within a private clinic, a fortress of glass and steel deliberately obscured from the city's gaze behind the mirrored facades of the financial district, the morning did not begin with the ritual of conversation or coffee. It began with the anxious, persistent shriek of medical monitors. Ward number 7 was regarded as the most rigorously protected space in the entire facility. 2 dedicated security guards stood at the door, surveillance cameras monitored the corridor, and the entire floor was sealed off. Here lay a small boy whose name was not uttered aloud, referred to only as the patient. Yet, everyone knew his true identity, the heir of the city's most formidable financial empire. The child was desperately thin, almost translucent, as if the very light filtering into the room passed unimpeded through his delicate skin. His hands rested atop the pristine white sheet, his fingers exhibiting a slight, nearly imperceptible tremor that periodically surfaced. His chest rose and fell with palpable difficulty. Every intake of breath required an enormous effort, making it seem as though the air itself grew exponentially heavier with each passing second. The sophisticated machines recorded an increasingly unstable cardiac rhythm, yet they stubbornly refused to display the underlying cause, and this terrifying ambiguity was the worst symptom of all. 17 physicians encircled the bedside, the absolute finest minds in their respective fields. They had been flown in from every corner of the country. Some were brought in on red-eye commercial flights, others by private helicopter. The team included a globally recognized cardiologist, a neurologist who had authored medical school textbooks, a toxicologist notorious for assisting in international forensic investigations, 2 tenured professors, 3 department heads, and a collection of highly sought-after private consultants. White coats, faces etched with grave professional concern, tablets clutched in their hands, and not a single one possessed an answer. Pressure is dropping again. The critical care specialist murmured softly, his gaze locked on the vital signs displayed on the screen. Oxygen saturation is stable, a dedicated nurse replied, confirming the basic reading. Labs show 0 anomalies, added the laboratory technician, handing over a sheaf of printouts detailing perfect blood work. The chief of staff, a man whose temples were dusted with gray and whose eyes sagged with accumulated weariness, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. In his 30 years of practice, he had witnessed everything from rare tropical diseases to miraculous recoveries. But this was unprecedented. Symptoms were aggressively present, but the root cause seemed to be dissolving, escaping every diagnostic attempt. A few steps from the bed stood the boy's father. His bespoke suit, tailored to perfection, now looked alien and unnecessary on his frame. His tie was loosened, his pristine shirt unbuttoned 1 degree past what etiquette allowed. He stared at his son, refusing to blink, terrified that if he shifted his gaze, he would lose him forever. "I don't understand," he said, his voice quiet but directed at the group. "I provided you with everything. The best equipment, unlimited funds, any specialist you requested. Why is my son dying?" No response followed. The physicians exchanged uneasy glances. Some dropped their eyes. Others pretended to be deeply engrossed in studying the data. The silence in the room thickened into something suffocating and oppressive. "We cannot establish a diagnosis without supporting evidence," the neurologist finally declared. "We have ruled out stroke, tumors, infections, autoimmune reactions. We have ruled them all out." Ruled out. The father's voice trembled with sudden, dangerous emotion. "And did you rule out death?" Those words hung suspended in the hyper-sterilized air. No one dared offer a retort. Time dragged by with agonizing slowness. Every minute felt like an hour. Nurses entered and exited, switching 4 drips and checking sensors. Doctors clustered in the corner, arguing in hushed, frustrated tones, only to return to the bedside and shake their heads again. There was no solution, It was precisely at this moment, when the tension reached its absolute breaking point, that the door to the ward quietly, almost imperceptibly, creaked open. At first, no one paid attention. They were too absorbed in the glowing screens and their own overwhelming failure. Standing hesitantly in the doorway was a young woman in her early 20s. She wore the plain, slightly oversized uniform of a cleaning staff member, the sleeves showing signs of wear and tear. In her hands, she carried a pale gray bucket and a mop. She had simply come to perform her daily duty, as she did every day, trying to be invisible, trying not to disturb the important people. Excuse me, she whispered, already prepared to pull the door shut and disappear. But her gaze snagged on the boy. Something about his face compelled her to freeze. She didn't know who he was. She didn't understand the cost of the blinking machinery, nor could she parse the complex medical jargon. She simply looked. The girl took one tentative step forward, then another. The doctors were so deeply engaged in their whispered debate that they didn't immediately register the intruder. She stopped beside the bed and frowned. Her gaze traveled slowly over the child. His face, his lips, his neck, his hands. She noticed the peculiar way his fingers lay, almost curled inward, and the subtle discoloration of the skin at his wrist. She leaned in a fraction closer, scrutinizing him, as if trying to recall a long-forgotten memory. Hey, you can't be here. One of the doctors finally noticed her and snapped, clearly annoyed. Leave immediately. The girl flinched, but did not immediately retreat. She looked once more at the boy, and then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Did he eat anything unusual today? A heavy, absolute silence fell over the room. The 17 physicians stared at her with a mixture of disbelief, professional outrage, and profound irritation. That is none of your concern. Another specialist retorted harshly. We are treating a critical condition here, not discussing dietary habits. I was just asking, she said softly. She started to step away, apologizing under her breath, but her eyes fell again upon the sheet, spotting barely visible, faint smears and the thin, reddish lines on the boy's skin that the doctors had universally dismissed as a typical mild allergic reaction to the medications. To her, it looked entirely different. That's not an allergy. The words escaped her unintentionally. What did you say? The chief of staff whipped around. The girl went pale, realizing she had spoken her thought aloud. I might be wrong, she stammered quickly, but I've seen something like this before. The doctors exchanged more weary, exasperated glances. Listen. The cardiologist cut in, his tone hard and uncompromising. We appreciate your effort, but this is not the time for amateur guesswork. The boy's father remained silent, watching the cleaning woman intently, as if clutching at a last, flimsy straw. Where did you see this? He asked, his voice strained and hoarse. The girl swallowed hard. In the village where I grew up, she replied. We didn't have a proper hospital there. People often confused wild herbs or mushrooms. One boy had almost the exact same symptoms. They treated him for the wrong thing first, too. The words hung in the air, suddenly imbued with unexpected weight. Several doctors frowned. Someone instinctively glanced at the monitor. Another looked down at the child's hands. That is impossible. The toxicologist muttered dismissively. We tested for industrial toxins, for chemical agents. They aren't those kind, she said quietly, almost defensively. The chief of staff slowly straightened his posture. For the first time that day, a new emotion flickered in his tired eyes. Doubt. Show us what you mean, he instructed after a long pause. The girl carefully lifted the edge of the sheet, pointing directly at the skin, highlighting the subtle lines that no one had previously considered relevant. In that instant, something shifted in the room. Not on the screens, not in the lab reports, but in the atmosphere itself. It was as if a crucial detail, overlooked by 17 highly trained specialists, had finally clawed its way into the light. The chief of staff silently studied the lines the girl indicated, as if seeing them for the very first time. He did not rush to argue. Too many certainties had already proven false that day. One by one, the doctors moved closer to the bed, peering, squinting. What had seemed like insignificant skin irritation a minute ago suddenly acquired a terrifyingly specific meaning. Was there tingling in his fingers? The girl asked softly, afraid of receiving another sharp rebuke. The nurse rapidly flipped through her charts. Yes, the child complained this morning. We attributed it to severe dehydration. And his tongue? The girl continued. Did he say it felt like he couldn't control it? A new, potent silence descended. The critical care specialist slowly nodded his head. There was a brief episode of numbness, transient aphasia. Damn it all. The toxicologist jolted upright as if struck by lightning. He snatched his tablet and began frantically searching through rare medical reference texts, scrolling through esoteric entries. It's a non-standardized natural poison, he muttered, panic rising in his voice. That's why the standard panels were clean. If she's right, we were looking in the wrong universe. Who are you? Exactly? One of the professors demanded sharply, though the arrogance had completely drained from his tone, replaced by sheer bewilderment. No one, the girl answered simply. I just remember. The chief of staff took a resolute step toward the father. We must change the protocol immediately. He stated in a low, firm voice. There is a significant risk, but inaction is far more dangerous now. The father did not hesitate, not for an instant. Do everything, he commanded. Absolutely everything necessary. A controlled frenzy erupted. The ward, which only a moment before had been suffocating in despairing stillness, sprang violently to life. Buttons were pressed, doors swung open. Rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor. People were summoned over the intercom. Sharp, concise orders were issued. Someone tried to usher the girl out, but the chief of staff stopped them with a gesture. Let her stay, he ordered. For now. The toxicologist returned to the bedside, his eyes wide and strained with urgency. It's a rare, naturally occurring neurotoxin, he announced to the group. The symptoms perfectly mimic advanced neurological failure and cardiac collapse. If we don't administer the specific antidote now, respiratory paralysis is imminent. How much time do we have? The critical care specialist demanded. An hour? Maybe less. The boy's father paled, but his gaze never left his son. His lips trembled, but he maintained a grueling composure. Will we make it? He asked, speaking into the empty air. If she is right, yes, the chief of staff replied. If not, he left the sentence unfinished. The antidote was prepared under emergency conditions. The nurses worked silently, focused, as if every stray second might be fatal. The girl stood near the wall, her hands pressed tightly to her chest. She could feel her own heart hammering, threatening to burst free. What if I was wrong? She whispered. The father turned toward her. If you hadn't said anything, he would already be gone. He replied quietly. Whatever happens next, you have done more than any of them. Those words seemed to anchor her slightly. The first dose was introduced slowly into the foreline. All 17 pairs of eyes were glued to the monitor. The line representing the heart rate was erratic, but it did not drop. A minute passed, then a second, then a third. The pressure is stabilizing. The nurse suddenly exclaimed, unable to believe her own reading. Saturation is rising. The critical care specialist confirmed. Silence returned to the ward. But this time it was different. Tense, expectant, filled with desperate hope. The doctors stood motionless, as if afraid to disturb the fragile phenomenon unfolding before them. And then, the boy let out a faint, shallow groan. It was incredibly weak, but the sound was potent enough to catch the breath in several chests. He's responding, someone whispered. The child's lips twitched. His small fingers clenched slightly. Color slowly began to return to his face. The ghostly pallor receded. The father finally succumbed to the strain and slumped into a chair. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time throughout the entire ordeal, A profound, muffled sob tore itself from his chest. We made it. The chief of staff announced a few minutes later. The crisis has passed. No one applauded, no one cheered aloud. The relief was private, almost sacred. The doctors exchanged glances that conveyed both immense professional relief and a lingering trace of shame. 17 specialists and one unassuming young woman. When the boy was transferred to stable status and the ward had emptied out, the father approached her. He looked different now, not like a man accustomed to issuing orders, but like an ordinary, humbled parent. What is your name? He asked. It doesn't matter, she replied, looking down. It matters to me, he said gently. You saved my son. She shrugged lightly. I just said what I saw. He paused for a second, then removed the wristwatch from his arm, an expensive, rare timepiece, and extended it to her. Take this. It is the least I can do. The girl shook her head. No. If you want to repay me. She hesitated for a brief moment. Just help someone else. Like you helped your son today. The man stared at her for a long time, as if trying to memorize every contour of her face. I will not forget, he said, the promise absolute. Never. As she walked down the long corridor, blending once more into the backdrop as a simple cleaner against the sterile white walls, the steady, rhythmic beat of a child's healthy heart echoed softly in the room behind her. And the 17 doctors, for the first time in a long time, were truly silent, because today they had been taught the most important lesson of all. That sometimes saving a life doesn't require a title or a degree, but simply the humility to pay attention to a minuscule detail that is impossible to see unless you are truly looking.